Hi, I'm Erin,
I'm Mo.
and this is Couch Astrology. So, me and Monique have been friends for almost 15 years, and for about 6 of those years, our conversations revolve like 80% around astrology. Um, Both of us have been into astrology for longer than that, but I'd say like beyond maybe like sun and moon. I don't even think I really like knew my rising
Yeah.
before that point, or other placements of mine. I think that was the first time that I like dug deep, got my birth time, and saw the whole deal.
hmm
But yeah, we pretty much have spent countless nights sitting up
hmm
on her couch, my bed,
Any couch?
any couch that we can find to talk about astrology all night long. Um, and it has, I mean, all of the rabbit holes that we've gone down have like broadened our knowledge so much. Um, and we thought we would share some of those conversations.
Yeah.
So,
Um, so I guess we should go into our big three.
yeah, actually, okay, you can start with yours.
Okay. Libra sun, Aries moon, Aries rising.
Okay. I'm a Leo sun, Aquarius moon, Leo rising. So we have like our sister signs and our sun and moon,
Yeah.
and then we both have fire risings. So it is fun to share things with each other.
Yeah. We also thought that we were both full moon
Yeah, we did. We did.
babies.
We thought we were both
Um,
full moon babies, but
I'm not, but it's okay.
she's processing that right now.
Yeah.
I did kind of also want to share like what maybe got us into astrology.
Yeah.
We touched on the fact that like we both had dabbled in it a little bit before we dove in together. But was there like anything specific that opened you up to astrology or that like kind of lit that light for you?
Um, yeah. So I would say there's like two moments throughout, but I think the first one was around 2016, and I was doing a yoga teacher training, and one of the instructors wanted us to look at our birth charts. So that's when I discovered that there was way more than just me being a Libra sun. And I think the big thing for me was seeing a lot of the fire. I have heavy Aries, I have heavy Sag placements, and the Sag Venus was something that especially caught my eye. And, I wanted to explore that. And then, even more so, when me and Erin started talking about astrology, I think she even expanded that more for me.
Like your understanding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like the planets and signs were just kind of as far as I went, and Aaron being into even more beyond that, and like having more knowledge on, houses. And that's when I started to learn about the 12th house, which we also both have in our big three, and that was another big moment of me like diving back in. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's our 12th house placements that like got us here, but I would not doubt that. Um, yeah.
So for you?
um, I would say probably right before the time that we started diving into this, because in my mind, the way that it happened was like I probably called you and was like, "Listen to this shit. Like
Yeah.
this is crazy."
Yeah.
Um, and we started diving in together, but probably around that time, so around 6 years ago, which was what 2019. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that feels right. That I was struggling really hard in a relationship, but I had always struggled in relationships. Like I always said that I felt like this like strong, independent woman, like this very like Leo-esque. Like I really related to my Leo
Mhm.
energy,
Mhm.
except when I was in a relationship or like in like just like an intimate partnership with anybody, I felt like I would just crumble.
Mhm.
And I would really like I experienced really dark times in my life. So, anyways, when I had opened up my birth chart for the first time that I remember clearly, and paid attention to like my Mars and Venus placements, which I have in Cancer in the 12th house, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like I sacrificed myself
Mhm.
on the backs of others, um, and it gave me like a sense of awareness that I didn't have before. So I feel like it really opened up this road to healing for me,
Mhm.
but also kind of like catapulted me into all the other, you know, darker planets
Mhm.
or placements in astrology. I think is like where I started. And then obviously I have a 12th house sun as well.
Mhm.
So kind of that took me longer to figure out what that meant
Mhm.
to me. But um, yeah, that was like the beginning of my journey, was like bringing my own birth chart into it and paying attention and being open to maybe like the darker themes that we use in astrology, which are necessary, you
Yeah,
know?
and I think that was another um, point of like things that we got excited to talk about. Not that that's the only thing, and that's like needs to take up most of the space, but I think maybe we just both naturally have personalities that are okay with going there. I think, you know.
Yeah, we already were like trauma sharing on a regular basis. And then we're like, wait, we can
Yeah.
like pinpoint this. Like
Yeah.
astrology gave me a map. And that map has been really helpful,
Yeah.
and it hasn't, I don't know, sometimes people will come to me and ask me questions about things in their chart or upcoming things. And I always kind of have to preface with like, are you ready for the information?
Yeah.
And not so much like, are you ready, but just like, are you open minded maybe enough to understand that just because astrology uses like heavy themes doesn't mean that we will be the living example of that extreme, right? Like it is
Yeah.
our responsibility to find like where we lie in the middle of that. And so that's been really the journey.
Yeah, and like, are you ready to go there with yourself
Yeah.
and look at some of those, like, you know, quote unquote shadow aspects or some of like the negative or darker side of like either signs or planets or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's something that I think there's also something to be said too, that we're also really close. So
Yeah.
like it's not as like, doesn't feel as like scary or vulnerable, or like to talk about like, oh yeah, you know, this might be why I act crazy here, or I do this, because
Yeah.
it's like it's kind of a safe space, and I
Yeah, and
think
we
that
know each
helps.
other really well. And it
Yeah.
helped, I think, knowing each other well to not only have my chart to reference, but to know you well and be able to reference your chart as well.
Right. Right.
Like you talked about your Venus in Sagittarius, which is so different than my Venus in Mars, or
Yeah.
I'm sorry, my Venus in Cancer. And, but that was one of those things about your chart that I literally heard and was like, oh, yeah, that makes complete sense for you.
Yeah.
It makes complete sense. And we are so different in those ways. And we've been able to really like compare and contrast our charts by like the differences in the ways that we are like affected by things.
Mhm.
And like you have areas where you're more sensitive to that
Mhm.
I'm not, and vice
Mhm.
versa,
Mhm.
you know?
And I think we get excited to talk about the other person's chart just as much as our own.
Yeah.
Like finding some information out about yours. It's like, oh my God, like what did it say and what do you think? And
Yeah.
like what do you notice about that? Like yeah, so it's just, you know, we're both equally like invested in each
Yeah.
other's stuff.
Yeah.
So
So to come off of that
yeah.
tangent, I definitely want to talk a little bit about just like what astrology is, but also what astrology maybe means to us. And I think we just touched on a little bit of that.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, do you want to explain, or do you want me?
You explain
Okay.
it.
I mean, I like the definition that astrology is just like kind of the correlation between the movement of the planets and what's going on, like the events on Earth.
Hmm.
And I think maybe Chani
Hmm.
worded it very simply that way and like pointed out that we are events.
Hmm.
So like the moment that you were born, where the planets were in the sky has a big effect on the nature of your life, you
Hmm.
know. And we'll go in to draw so many um, points together today, but I think that's a very simple explanation of what astrology is. Um,
Yeah.
and I should also say that if you've never looked up your astrology chart, there are a few websites that we like to use. Well, I'll say mine. I like to use AstroSeek as just one of kind of like my go-tos. And then I also like Time Passages is a great app. Um, I use a bunch of different sources and like pull information that I find relevant. And I've been able to kind of like use all of that together to make my own maybe like decisions on what fits where,
Hmm.
just based off of essentially people watching and living,
Yeah, yeah.
which is a lot of what studying astrology is. But I know you use some other sources as
Yeah,
well.
well, I think I started on astro.com, which is really fun because there's just so many different like personal portraits and like personality analysis and stuff like that on there. And then I've grown to like, I think as we started going into it together, AstroSeek was a really good one.
Yeah.
And then I even think uh, this is not something that I use, but as a gateway for most people, like CoStar was a big thing. And I think that, um, a lot of people might already have a CoStar and already have their chart on CoStar, and it can be fun. But I think when you branch out onto maybe like
Different
AstroSeek or
platforms.
something, yeah, that you can learn so much more and get maybe like a great understanding if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah. Any way is like a good way to get your
Mhm.
foot in the door,
Mhm.
and like while I don't use the app that I started on often, I wouldn't know what I did. Like that sparked, it turned the light on for me.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so it doesn't really matter where you start. Um, there are a few different ways of doing it. I will say that, um, well, I guess we don't even need to go into house systems
Yeah.
and stuff
No.
like that because
But we will
more,
eventually.
yeah, we will. We'll talk about houses, but today we just want to talk about the sun and the moon.
Yeah.
Um, so we'll get there in a second, but I guess a quick breakdown, even though we're not talking about the houses, branching off of what is astrology.
Well, can I pause you right there real quick?
Yeah.
The only other thing I was going to say is that I think, um, astrology having, so many different like branches and schools of thought and tropical astrology and Vedic astrology. Am I saying that right? Yeah. And then even Aaron and I might have different like ideas or interpretations or observations of things that like there is just so much to it, and it has very deep roots and is an ancient practice tool science whatever. And so we're always like looking to
Expand
yeah and understand
and put all the things together. I think all of these things kind of touch each other in different ways.
mm-hmm.
Um, and while like people may use different approaches, um, I love to have conversations where they all come together,
Yeah.
and where we kind of contrast reasons,
Yeah.
of why maybe certain people choose what. Um, but yeah, I do want to touch on branching more into what astrology is, and just to give like a very brief overview. Three things that will come up are like planets, signs, and houses.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to talk about what those things mean in a very vague way. Um, so planets show what is happening, while the signs show like how it's happening, and the house shows where it's happening. So we will not touch on all of those things today, but if you hear us, because we will go off into tangents and
Yeah.
conversations, naturally, that's just how we talk. But keep that in mind. If you
Mm-hmm.
hear us reference a house, which we may or may not, that is kind of a descriptor of where the energy goes.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that more later on. But I do think it's important just to know that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so go ahead.
Nothing.
Okay.
I don't know. I cut my hands.
Okay. So we originally were going to do this first episode on the 7 traditional planets,
Mm-hmm.
which were also known as like the 7 visible planets to ancient astrologers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that just like briefly and touch on like what the 7 visible planets were, and then kind of why we chose to just do the sun and moon today?
Yeah. So the 7 the 7 visible planets are the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Um, and um, I think that as we started going into it and diving into it, we started to realize there's just so much.
There's so much, and we talk so much.
Yeah,
we talk so much,
and I think that we want to talk.
Yeah.
We don't want to like cut ourselves off and be like, well, this is this, and then moving on. It's there's so much to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to know like all of these planets touch each other in one way or another,
Mm-hmm.
and that is why I want to have the big conversation. I want to have it, and we will have it, you
Yeah.
know, but this is starting small works. And I think everybody knows, or at least like today and the times that we're in, everybody's into like their big three. We told you ours, and sun and moon are two components of that. And it's become way more common for people to know both their sun sign and their moon sign.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, if you don't, you can go to the websites that we mentioned and you can find it. You will need your birth time. Well, you don't need your birth time for your sun and moon, but you will want it.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
going to want it.
Yeah.
So if you can find it, that's great. And it could be on your birth certificate. Mine was, but I know, like we've said, like I don't have my mom's because
Same.
it's on her birth certificate.
Yeah.
And
same.
also can't, we ordered it from the hospital
And it
they
doesn't
didn't
have
put
it.
on there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So anyways, that's a whole thing. But yeah, I think starting with the sun and moon and talking about what those things are and what they, you know, what they mean to each other and for us.
Mhm.
So
well, and also that the sun and moon are known as the luminaries, and technically not, I guess, quote unquote planets, but you know they're included in the 7 traditional planets in the conversation. So
yeah, they
we
are
are
the 2 luminaries.
yeah,
which are the 2 planets that will be, I mean, the sun is producing light, and then the moon is a reflection of that light, which really ties into a lot of the themes that we see. So yeah, I think that that is a great way to segue into like watching the planets. So one important thing that I like to touch on is like, what do we see? What do we see when we look at the planets? You know, because that will like say a lot for what they represent.
Yeah, just the visual characteristics of it.
Yes. Here's the sun. The sun is bright. It's hot. It is at the center, right? All of these planets are moving around the sun, and that is exactly what the sun represents.
Yep.
You know, and then we have the moon, which is a reflection of this light, you know, and I don't know, just the fact too that like it comes out at night. There's like this really personal aspect to the moon. It's common for people to say, and I know it's said on like maybe a few of the platforms that we use. I've kind of strayed away from this definition, but I don't think it's irrelevant. It helped me connect to the moon at first, is like that part of us that exists when we're all by ourselves.
Right.
You know?
Yep.
And the moon means so much more to me now. But that, oh my gosh, I was like, ooh, interesting.
And the sun, like when contrasting them, the sun being kind of out during the day, or because it makes the day, but being out when everything's going on, you're doing things, you're out, and then the moon coming out, and that's when you might have more like solitude, and there might be more reflection at the end of the day. And yeah.
I think too, something to be said about the moon is like that it is like our, well, the sun is kind of like our motivator, and not in the same way the ascendant is. Like it's not like, I would usually use the word motivation for like the ascendant, but like the sun almost tells us, like when we talked about this and when we got this piece of information, like, oh, that makes so much sense, is that the moon is kind of, or the sun is kind of like what we strive to be, you know what I mean? Like it that's where we want to hold our power, and the moon allows us to like bring that to fruition, because the moon represents the physical body as well.
And I think even, I mean, this goes a little bit further than just like visual description, but the sun also being, you know, what gives life to everything, you know, on earth, and it being kind of like the life force. And that kind of tying in, like I think with what you're saying, with it being a motivator, it's like, well, this is the force that's driving us, you know, this is like where our expression lies. And
the sun is, and just to give some like significations, which I'll literally read off, where like power source, ego and identity, shows us where we should learn to be independent. I love that one. Where we should fulfill our potential, also love that one, and differentiate ourselves from others and shine. So for so long, the sun was described to me like ego and identity. Ego, identity, personality. That is easy to relate to for like a Leo like me. It just is. You know what I mean? I have other Leo placements that like reinforce this. And like, I think about the ego that comes with Leo, like the pride, right? And things like that. And I'm like, okay, I mean, yeah, but that just felt shallow. You know
Yeah,
what I
it's almost
mean?
like too easy.
It was too easy,
Yeah.
you know, and some of it is too easy. Like
Mhm.
some of it is like, ooh, that hits, you
Mhm.
know. But to hear things like where we should learn to be independent, and this is a great example, and this is where I start pulling people in, right?
Mhm.
There are people in my life. Okay, I won't like name them, but let's like use a Virgo for example.
Mhm.
Okay, Virgo's in my life. Well, I'm like, well, if Virgo represents this, now I know a lot of people that, you know, represent this kind of sense of orderliness that maybe like the earth would represent.
Mhm.
And then I have some Virgos in my life where I'm like, and I'm talking full, like heavy Virgo energy outside of just the sun, right? But
Yeah.
what I notice in this is like, they are drawn to this. They are drawn to what the sign of Virgo represents,
Mhm.
you know? And that, and I'll go back to myself being a Leo, even when I'm maybe operating on like a low frequency, I'll
Mhm.
say, where I want to be, I'm usually there's a lesson there, right?
Mhm.
I'm always wanting to gain independence and fulfill my potential in like self expression.
Mhm.
And watching people, what inspires me is like exactly that.
Mhm.
I don't care how weird you are,
Yeah.
how out there you are. When I see someone just authentically showing up, I'm like, I want to do that. And
Yeah.
I don't always succeed at that, you know,
Yeah.
but that's usually like that sun is that drive. And so I thought it was interesting today. I was listening to some things and it was talking about that drive of the sun, right? Like that is where I need to put my energy into, but the moon helps me learn how to bring that into the physical realm.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to
Mhm.
me, you know, and I think it's especially because like my Leo is so me, 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 me. And it's not even that, but Leo thrives in the sun, is ruled by the sun. But then I have Aquarius on the other end, which is all about the group, you
Mhm.
know, and this, it's a completely different set of thinking than like the Leo holds. And so it's interesting. It's like, okay, I'm inspired here, right? Like I'm pushing my motivation forward, but my Aquarius moon is like, how can we make this work for us?
Yeah, and I think that is something as you start, going into maybe some like comparisons with the sun and moon, where like the moon is that kind of like source of like creativity, and then the sun is how you express it. Like they want to work together in that way,
Yeah.
and I think that it can be kind of confusing. I do think that some people, including myself, I think as I was getting into astrology and still learning, but that the sun is is that sort of like the sun would be differentiated into like this is where the creativity lies,
Mm.
and your moon is like this sort of shell of emotions, and it's like but they really like fulfill jobs hand in hand kind of.
For sure. And all of their themes kind of complement each other in a way.
Right.
Um, like so many of the words that sometimes I find myself using for the sun would be used, and I'll bring in just for the purpose of the statement, like
Mhm.
the ascendant, right? Where I would like interchangeably use words between them. And for a
Mhm.
long time, it was hard for me to differentiate
Mhm.
kind of like what role did each of them play. Um, but now I see how they all work together, but then also function separately.
Right.
And that actually took a while for
Yeah.
me, you know, um, because when things work so closely together, like that sun and moon are like the most concentrated energies that we have in our chart, you know?
Yeah.
And so naturally, we see them show up so often, even within observations and stuff. It's, you know, trying to figure out like what goes where, you know, what's
Yeah.
coming from where,
Yeah.
and then putting words to that.
Yeah. Well, and I think to go back to your point about your example of Virgo, um, and I feel like we kind of like glazed over it about what you were exactly referring to, but like knowing Virgos that aren't that stereotype of like so orderly and so clean and so whatever, and then being maybe a little bit more chaotic, or maybe not chaotic, but just like not really worried about the routine and the order. But yeah, as you were,
Yeah.
expanding on it being more of like that's something that they admire, or like a goal, or
It's
like
like a striving to.
yeah, or honor in
Yeah.
other people. Like that
For
is
sure.
yeah.
Like what do I lift other people up for? Like what is that thing that I see in someone that's like that I kind of put them on the pedestal for? Because like there are people that I know who, and I'll like use my dad as an example,
Mm-hmm.
and he is one of the Virgos in my life, but he sees people who really have it together in that sense, but also there's this sense of creativity to Virgo too,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
especially when it comes to writing and things like that. My dad is a writer. And so there are all of these things that this is like where he strives to,
Right.
what he strives to be kind of, but even I would take that part out and just saying like, those are the people that he points out that is like, look how well they're doing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting how we all kind of have different things that we're like, look how well they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And for me, your life could be a mess. I don't care. But if you are being authentic to yourself, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm like, look at you,
Yeah.
you know? And so
Shining. Yeah.
yeah, look at you shining. But it's so true,
Yeah.
you know, and I noticed that in other people. So it's interesting to kind of see like the differences and like observe what matches with what.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So I do kind of want to go into rulership a little bit because I
Right.
think it will open up the conversation more.
Yeah.
So what I like about this is we'll bring in rulership and pretty much talk about rulership versus exaltation and, you know, fall and all those things. So I have my sun in Leo, as I said, which is ruled by the sun. So what we see with that is that Leo kind of represents the same themes as the sun,
Right.
and really helps support this idea of what the sun is trying to get done.
Mm-hmm.
Like they almost mesh completely together.
Yeah. One will teach you about the other, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
100%. And I love that. That's like a really cool thing about rulership. And the sun is obviously a great example of it. I think Leo is one of those ones that just matches up like
Yeah.
right
Really
on the
well.
dot.
Yeah.
But like the Leo wants to be the center. They're represented as like the king.
Mm-hmm.
It is like a masculine
Mm-hmm.
energy, but very much so wants to like lead the pack.
Yeah.
You know, that is the lion. And here's the sun who represents the same
Mm-hmm.
same idea. You know, the sun wants you to shine because
Mm-hmm.
the sun wants to shine, I should say.
Yeah.
The
Or
sun
it
wants to
just
shine.
does.
Yeah, and it just does.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas so does the Leo. Like the Leo, I feel weird saying
Yeah.
that. So does the Leo. She just shines. But that's not what I mean, right? It's like and it's funny because throughout my life, and especially in these last handful of years, I've met so many Leos that like really have a softer energy. And this is where we get deeper into the chart, right? Like looking at the rising sign and the moon and all these things. But like being able to separate those things, right? Like the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Something about someone who has their sun in Leo, you can usually spot that kind of energy,
Mm-hmm.
and they can be charismatic in different ways. It doesn't always mean maybe like the center of attention, in a way that you would think, like so outwardly, like you walk in a room and the
Mm-hmm.
people flock. It doesn't always work like that.
But it's kind of like, I would say, like a gravitational pull, and
Yeah.
that, and like in a positive way. And I mean, that does describe the sun as well,
Yeah.
you know, and that's just the comparison right there is that, you know, it's not that the Leo is coming into the room and it's like everybody has to turn their eyes to them and everybody has to crowd around them. It's that when the Leo walks into the room, you're happy that they're walking into the room. Like you want to come to them, you know, it's a warm feeling. It
not
feels
all Leos,
good.
but yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know,
but yes, and that's
a baseline.
Yes, and I think it's so important to know like we choose what frequency we operate on,
right?
You know, and that goes for any person and any placement. Like that's called
and any
that's
stereotype,
called free will.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's just the truth. But is the theme of autonomy, you know, and I think that's a great word to use for it. Whereas we then have the sun in detriment, which would be in Aquarius, which would be the opposite sign of Leo, which we kind of talked about because my moon's in Aquarius. So that kind of separation between them, whereas Leo wants to be autonomous, right? Leo and the sun only knows self, right? And it sounds selfish, but if the sun, some part of your chart has to represent you.
The sun has to be the sun.
The sun has to be the sun, or nothing else would be lit up,
right?
You know? And so this is where that energy comes from. But whereas Aquarius functions within groups, and tries to get
community
like community and like the bigger idea and those things. So then we'll go into like exaltation and fall. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I actually had some different, I think this is kind of why I mentioned earlier that there's just so many different like interpretations. And I think it's interesting because as I've been like diving into like exaltation, like specifically in like rulership, there's so many different interpretations of it. And I think like, so I guess the rulership, Leo rules, or am I saying that backwards? The sun is ruled by Leo.
The sun is ruled by
Yeah,
Leo.
the sun is ruled by Leo. It's exalted in Aries. It's in the fall in Libra, and it's in detriment in Aquarius. And so I think some people or some astrologers I see like will say, if it's exalted, it's at its most extreme, and if it's in rulership, it's at home, and if it's in the fall or detriment, it's weaker. And I think they're like easier. That's an easy way to kind of just interpret and understand. I think that's definitely true for like the rulership of Leo being at home in the sun. But one interpretation I saw was about like visibility, and that Leo being in the sun, they are at home, they are taking up space comfortably, they are seen. And Aries being exalted, it's even a step above that, where it's like they are put on a pedestal, so to speak, in a way. Like this isn't their home, but they're like an honored guest. And then I guess Libra and Aquarius would feel unseen in a way. And I can't speak too much on Aquarius being in detriment, but I think as a Libra, that kind of made sense to me, because I think that it's to me, it feels too easy to say like, well, Sun and Leo have it easy. Like they are seen more easily as how they want to be, or like there is challenges, I'm sure you could like say as being a Sun in Leo, and how people might perceive you or whatever. There, everybody has those challenges in the sun, but I think it's that for what I've seen for Aries being exalted, it's like a hunger, like they want to be seen as what the sun represents.
Yeah.
Where Leo's already there. Aries wants to be seen as successful. It wants to be seen as like a people person, popular and likable, and it's more of a need, it's more of a requirement to like self-fulfillment than I think for Leo to feel like this just is, and I can choose either or, and I'm comfortable either way.
Right.
And then I think where Libra falls onto that as being in fall is that it's more of like they don't expect to be seen. Like an Aries being exalted expects this, like this to be seen this way. And a planet in the fall kind of already has like, I guess, a jaded attitude. I don't expect this from others. I don't expect to be seen. I'm a little bit more comfortable in hiding. And so in a way, they can almost marry each other, Aries and Libra and the sun, sometimes for not sure that they're coming off the way they want to, or that they're being seen, but just in different aspects. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm kind of going on a tangent.
No, it does. And I think it's important to look at like the actual, like what's actually happening in each sign, right? Whereas like Leo and Aries, Leo shines, right? Like that, and that's why it is the sun. But Aries is literally self, right? Like Aries is a big theme of Aries is self. It's the first sign of the zodiac. And so here they are before everything else, And I think Aries, I like to look at planets that are, or signs that are exalted in a planet. Like exaltation is this like empowerment, like Aries is really able to empower this idea of sun and autonomy, because they know how to stand in self. I know how to promote this idea of shining and being the center. And while the energies maybe don't match up, like Aries and Leo, the energies aren't going to align completely. That's the point of exaltation, is you kind of have that like cheerleader who's like, hell yeah, I support this. You know what I mean? And something that aligns with that. And then you look at like the detriment and fall, the signs that are in detriment and fall, and it's Aquarius and Libra.
Right.
And they are centered on other
Community
people
and a partnership.
You see other people come into the equation. And that is not a bad thing, right? So I think that's also important to disclose, is like, I need other people in my chart, right? Like I just do. And they come in regardless of if Libra or Aquarius or these, other signs make it into another planet. I could have a straight shot chart of being a Leo and I'll still have energies come in. I just will. I'll have signs, fall into my houses and, so on and so forth. But that is important. But the sun doesn't represent that. The sun is not that.
Exactly.
And so to have a sign like Libra or Aquarius who is centered on not themselves, right? Who their main purpose as an energy is not to, complement themselves and lift themselves up. It is more so to, for Aquarius, find the bigger picture, like what's the word here? What are we all saying? And not for lack of thought, but for like purpose of truth, if that makes sense, like to find the truth. And then you have Libra, who is obviously focused on, I always describe it as on like maybe smaller interactions or like maybe, relationship with another person.
Right. And I think that's like the conflict starts to become like, well, in the sun, if the goals we're trying to move towards is me, I have an internal conflict. I'm not saying just me personally, but just like Libra has an internal conflict of being like,
what about that guy?
What about we?
Yeah.
I want to move towards a we. And the sun is like, no, I don't care.
That's not what we're doing here.
Yeah. And so it can be, and that is the uncomfortability, I think there. And it's not, and that's why, I think like the why and how or whatever is that, Libra being there, it's not worried about that much about being seen, and that's why it can be harder to kind of like pin down, where like a Leo and Aries, it's like, they're here, especially, I think of an Aries, like they're go, they're on their mission and they're, just going for it, and they don't care what's behind them, you know. And like Libra is like, I'm okay being back here and not, if we're together, and like,
for sure. Yeah. And I think it's also important to note that the two signs that are ruled and exalted in the sun are fire signs.
Yeah.
Well, and because the sun is this big ball of fire, and this just is the only thing that makes sense.
And the light, of Aries being the start of spring and the first sign, and it's that primal, spark or start of life, and also the light starts to increase, the days start to get longer.
Yeah, that was something that you started to touch on earlier that I did want to elaborate on, was the like, we talked about the first way that you can study astrology is to literally watch what's happening with the planet.
Right.
And the sun provides light. The sun provides light. When does it provide light? Great question. Well, it provides light in the spring, which is the beginning of Aries season. It provides light in the summer, is like right up there. The hottest time that it's going to be is the middle of the summer, which is right when Leo season is. And then we have Libra, which is the beginning of fall, which is in fall, but it is the beginning of fall. And or not even, it's like you're in there. Like it's fall and it's darker. The light is starting to kind of go away. Days get shorter. And then you have Aquarius, which is like end of the year and it's dark. It's cold. You know what I mean? The sun is not present. And so these are ways that we can kind of look up to see what's happening and what that means. The same thing applies for the moon. In different ways. And I think we could maybe transition over into talking about the moon a little bit more if you want to. Okay. You want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay. So the moon is ruled by Cancer.
Right.
Another great example of the themes
Just
really
being
tying
so spot on right
in
there.
rulership.
Yeah.
Yeah, the moon, and this is something I want to get into more once we're past rulership, but like the moon represents the mother, you know, Cancer represents the mother, being nurturing. What is your relationship like with your mom? All of these really freaking cool things.
Those
you know?
emotions, the subconscious,
Yes.
and what's
Yeah.
underneath the surface. Like, you know, if I'm like thinking about imagery, you know, and you're looking at like the sun over like in a skyline, like the ocean, it's like the sun's right here and it's bright, and then it goes down, the moon comes up, and I just think about the ocean and the, you know, it's just like,
yeah.
yeah.
And I want to read some of the significations too about the moon, like, and some of them are like your past, right? Which, I mean, think if the moon is ruled by the mother, it is like, yes, you know, yes, your inner child, your inner mother, you know, your emotional life, how you express feelings, your subconscious, you know. And I don't know, I loved that, and I kept this because I loved it, this half of it, where it's like when I heard someone say the moon is when you like know what you mean, and then the other half of it is supposed to be the sun. It's like, but you can't say it, you know. I don't know about the other half. Maybe, you know, maybe depends on your Mercury.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I love that first half. Like the moon is like when you know what you mean. Oh my God, if that's not the truth. Where it's so like, no, I'm just, my moon is so different from the rest of my chart. Like it's so, it's just feels like such a prominent place to me. But it's like, and I know that you probably relate to this because you have that Aries moon, and you have such a different energy to you. And we have to talk about this sometimes because like the way that you like express your internal self to me, I know you well, so I know that exists. But if you ask me, no, that's not how you come off. You come off like a Libra. You come off full on Libra energy, like this soft nature. Everybody's drawn to you, and people say up until this very specific stage of my life, okay, that I'm like pretty, you know, I definitely am forward. Well, people still say that about me, but like I have a big energy, you know, and maybe not always at the very first time you meet me, or it just depends on the environment that I'm in. But I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the bigger purpose here. You know what I mean? I know that sounds so silly, but it is like there is this bigger mentality that comes with Aquarius that I really appreciate. It is my favorite part of my chart, and I'm so grateful for it. But sometimes I feel tongue tied because I'm like, no, you don't get it.
Yeah, and I think even just having the sister signs in our big three too, it's like I think that there's some balance there, and that there's also just like, you know, inner like push and pull.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, at least I feel that internally. I know that externally it can be like hard for me to show what I'm trying to say, like say what I mean, you know, I know what I mean. But I think even internally, it's like there's that, the two, you know, the Libra and the Aries in my head, like, well, no, we want this, and no, we want this, and this is what I think, this is what I feel. And, you know, it feels like I'm between two sometimes more than it's like just like a harmonious balance. I don't know if you feel that way with the Leo and Aquarius, if they're like
if they're fighting each other kind of sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes,
like, it's more so I think for me a sense of being understood, and I think that that's a common experience, whether you have sister, you know, your moon and sun are opposite of each other like ours are, or whether you just have any moon that's different than your sun. You know, is like there's this fluency I think that comes with sun moon combos that are the same. You know, like people who have the same sign and both their sun and their moon, there's this fluency to being able to maybe come off.
I know what I mean, and I know how to say it.
Yeah, I know what I mean, and I said it. You know? And that's just, it's trying. I think for me, it's been a learning process of how to get those two parts of myself to communicate with each other, and I think they do a lot better now. You know, they do a lot better, and I do a lot better of understanding both and listening to them. And this has helped so much. You know, like understanding what is the responsibility of each one. You know, am I trying to get something out of a planet that it's not meant for? If that makes sense. Like what is each of their
Or am I
roles?
like ignoring this part of me
Yeah.
that does need,
Yeah.
attention, or does need to be seen? And,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
really a lot about like the validating that both halves of yourself are true,
Right.
especially with such strong energies like the sun and the moon,
Mhm.
is that both of those things can exist together, especially again for like opposite signs,
Mhm.
right? Is like those both things exist and both things are true. And I love both of those things about myself. Now, how can I show up in the world in a way that is authentic to both? And I think that's just like the process of learning how to live.
Yeah.
I would argue that, which is what astrology is. Like, astrology gives us the map, and we get to like trial and error it through experience,
Mhm.
you know, is like what feels authentic and what doesn't. Um, so, yeah, I love that. Um, but the moon rulership,
Mhm.
back to Cancer, um, is a big one. And then we have that opposite. I don't know if you want to kind of go through these.
For the
And
moon?
we don't have to walk through each like part of the rulership. I know we
Okay.
did that for the sun, but I mean,
We
just
we
if
don't have
there's,
anything personal for the moon. So.
yeah, I mean, I have a lot of people in my life with these placements, so it's interesting. But if you don't want to go into like the full rulership, we don't have to.
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Um, okay.
So,
One.
oh,
Sorry,
go on.
real quick. One observation that I do have about like moon in Cancer.
Mhm.
If we're getting into that, I have more than any. And I won't even get into this part, but more than any placement in my life, probably other than like Aries moon, tons of Aries moons in my life, but moon in Cancer, obviously we know, not great experience
Mhm.
there, but it just was a theme,
Mhm.
and also then I learned that my mom and dad both have moon in Cancer, which was also strange.
Yeah, and then your own Venus and Mars, having the Cancer. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, but like specifically to that moon, I think is like one thing that I've noticed about moon and Cancer is actually they do, because we think of, so back to like sun and Leo, being
Mhm.
exalted in Leo, is this ease at expressing what the themes of the sun are
Mhm.
in that sign. Um, but what we see in the moon in Cancer is um, a lot of the times like a kind of rejection of that, of the expression of that. And I think maybe it's because it is the moon and it is more hidden, right? Like the
Mhm.
moon I'll say, can be more hidden than the sun.
Mhm.
Obviously, the sun is meant to shine. But I noticed that. I don't know if you, I mean,
And what, like, that it has a harder time with the theme, or that
that
it.
Cancer moons are not what, when I would think of the stereotype or maybe a lot of the themes that are tied with Cancer and that are tied with the moon, um, there isn't such an ease at expressing that, at least outwardly.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if that is because the moon is kind of tucked away in that sense.
I think you're right, and I think what I'm about to touch on might be like just a whole other conversation separately, but I think something to note is also like Cancer being ruled by the mother, the moon being ruled by the mother, and like what, kind of like how the mother and like the feminine energy and the emotional sensitive energy is like what that looks like in our culture,
Yeah.
and like, why that might not be, um I don't know, like, um, nurtured in a way
Yeah.
to be at its, like, to reach its fulfillment.
Yeah.
And because I think that it should want to be there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That the Cancer moon should feel, so much, and to be nurturing and to be resourceful, and to, and I think that, I mean, I just think that alone, and like today, is just a concept that a lot of people like ignore in themselves, maybe.
100%. And I think there is, like, yeah, there is a societal factor for sure. And if we look at what is the moon, right? If the
Mhm.
moon is, and we talked about like this, you know, um, this physical embodiment
Mhm.
almost, or like, how can I make this real? How can I make this, you know, tangible and physical? How can I bring it into the physical realm, And if Cancer in the moon is asking us to be vulnerable and be open you know, and to allow those parts of ourselves to be exposed, that's a tall order, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Especially if they
Can be
get
a tall
hurt.
order,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I think that is definitely, um, yeah, and I see that in more masculine people in my life, you know.
Right.
And so it's interesting, and I can see it on both sides, um, but that definitely is I think it is like a maybe could have something to do with that.
Yeah.
So okay.
Um, and then the moon's in detriment in Capricorn, opposite to Cancer,
Hmm.
exalted in Taurus, and then in fall in Scorpio.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, Cancer is, or I'm sorry, Capricorn is known for, and obviously being the opposite of Cancer, for maybe having more of like a blockage, for lack of a better word, to like the comfort of those emotions. Um, and so we see that like this like sense of being closed off
mm-hmm.
towards that part
And the
of himself.
fluidity of,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's Earth. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Is
Mm-hmm.
now we're into like water versus Earth, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is I love.
Mm-hmm.
I love that we're talking about the moon and the sun was kind of, you know, fire against air. And now we're hearing it's like water against earth. And that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. If the moon kind of rules this emotional part of ourselves, then it's like, you know, we're doing pretty well over here in the water. It's like I'm able to flow through these
Mm-hmm.
things. And then the earth challenges that
Yeah.
naturally, you
And there's
know?
actually one thing I saw that was interesting the other day as I was just, some preparation for us talking about this right now. And I think it was like a comment on a thread or something. And somebody was like, it makes no sense that um, Taurus would be exalted, the moon. It's, Taurus is like earth and, the moon is wet and cold and dark. And I think, I'm like, no, but the luminaries and the moon does reflect this light from the sun, and it's not like the sun in that way, and it's but it's not some dark far off planet. It's their other light in the sky when the sun's gone. And so I think um I don't know where else. Oh, with Capricorn being in detriment and being in that really like that darker season, the darker time of day. And I don't know, I can see why it's not fitting, beyond like I think the moon can be misunderstood in that way sometimes,
For sure. Yeah. And it's important to know, talking about Taurus, like Taurus wants to be home.
Right.
You know, like Taurus literally wants to be at home
Mhm.
and like be comfortable. And like
Mhm.
those may be, you know, kind of a blanket explanation of Taurus, but it's so true when we talk
Mhm.
about the moon, you know, is that sometimes we can take these themes that maybe get overused sometimes, and like find where they fit.
Yeah, because there's warmth in the moon, and I think that, and that's an example I think I would think about with Scorpio being in the fall is that okay, well Scorpio is a little bit colder
Yeah.
and it's wet and it's a water sign, but it's not doing well in the moon, and
No.
it and obviously it makes sense when you think about Scorpio being that more like not
Assertive.
vulnerable and
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, there's warmth to the moon, and there's that creativity, and there's that comfortability, and so
Yeah.
I shouldn't be just like thought of as so opposite to the sun. I think it's almost like it's sidekick in a way, I
Yeah.
guess, or yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. For sure. Um, okay. So another thing that I wanted to mention was, um, back to the sun,
Mhm.
is that like the sun has the ability to obviously brighten something, right? And like illuminate it,
Mhm.
but it also has the ability to hide, you
Mhm.
know? And so it's like there's this idea, this can get so deep, right? And we won't go all the way here today, but like talking about degrees and stuff, right?
Mhm.
Which degrees are listed on your chart for every single placement.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just fun. I remember first getting into them and thinking like, one, whoa, there's a lot here.
Yeah,
Like there's so much.
so
There's so
much.
many layers
There's
to
people who
this.
even think being exalted isn't even like accurate if you don't have the degrees in the exaltation. I mean, it goes
Yeah, it
so
goes
like
so deep.
meticulous and
Yeah,
yeah.
but sometimes like with simple ideas we can start, you
Right.
know. And this one stuck out to me, and I thought it would be fun to bring it in. Is that like anything within 15 degrees of the sun, is they say that like you can be like under the beams, and I took it
Mm.
as like you are literally physically, like the planet is hidden by the rays of light that the sun creates.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting because I had my chart up, which I'll literally pull up, but I think it's 9 degrees that my sun is within my Mercury is 9 degrees away from my sun. Yeah. And we were just talking about that the other day because I can struggle with maybe like I have my sun in Leo in the first house, and I can struggle sometimes articulating, like this has been a theme in my life. And so it's interesting just reading things like that where I'm like, oh, my Mercury is getting blasted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I'm burning up.
Nobody can see her. Like,
so she thought she was so strong.
Yeah. Wait, can you look at this for me?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that not my Mercury?
Your Mercury's here.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So let's actually.
And is that my sun?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Done.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess I have the same.
Yeah. So you would actually go to the aspect and look, and you're less than a degree away from the sun.
Yeah.
So anyways, there is such thing as being too close. And I heard someone explain it in this way where like, and I twisted it a little bit, but same idea, right? Is like when it's warm out, it's like, oh, it's such a nice day today. I'm going to go soak up the sun. But when it's blazing hot, you do not want to go outside. But on top of that, when you do go outside, you get heat exhaustion, and that was the point that she made was like that same heat exhaustion that we experience. Once again, looking at the planets and seeing what they actually do, like what is actually happening. Like that is kind of the way that the planets are affected by being so close to the sun.
Right. And I think even another analogy, to think of is like, I mean, the fact that we wear sunglasses, you go outside and it's like, yeah, no, the sun creates light and you can see everything. And it's like, yeah, but like you can be literally blinded by the sun and like you can lose,
lose my vision.
Yeah, you're driving and it's like, I can't, like, it's too much light. And I think that, it's like all you see is this white beam, and so
and that's why the other planets are so important.
Yeah.
Why they're so important.
Yeah.
And that's why it's also like important to draw back into like when we were talking about rulership and stuff, like we went real deep into the whole Leo.
Yeah, maybe a little too deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Like we were really boosting this thing up. But we did specify that this is the sun, right? And these things honor what the sun is trying to do and yada, yada. We talked about it. But have you met a Leo and an Aries who doesn't have a fault? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like every sign, whether it's like every placement, whether exalted, whether in rulership, we're all human beings.
Yeah. And not only is it that there might be, imperfections or whatever, but it's not easy, and I think even people might look at Leos too, or in Aries and think like, oh, it's so easy for them and blah, blah. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Like it might be more comfortable and whatever, but it's not to say that you don't ever have, things you're concerned about or struggles, even with, how you're perceived or expressing yourself. It's not the case that it's just, there's no challenge there. It's just like a walk in the park,
So. And it is where we look into the chart more, and also asking yourself, like, where am I meeting this person? Like in what setting? Do you know what I mean? Is like, I do think that's, it says a lot to maybe like how the person is showing up or how they're able to show up in that environment. Is like looking at their chart and analyzing those things, because there are places where I lean real close into my sun, just naturally, you know what I mean? And I think that's the truth for many people, whereas other people meet me and they're like, you are so like chill and laid back and soft. So it is like that, and it's not that I'm ever faking it, right? It's just that I'm able to show up in different ways sometimes with different people, and you'll always get all sides of me. But where, maybe like the introduction point, like where are we, and kind of seeing what factors are at play.
Right. You're not going to see all of everybody at once at first glance.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So I do want to move on. Another thing that I like to mention about the moon, jumping back into the moon, is that the moon is that often, like we said, that it's like when you know what you want to say, which is one way of putting it. But then how about the gut feeling?
Right.
The moon is that gut feeling. The moon is ruled by the stomach, which is the gut feeling. Like all of these things pair together.
And that is where your emotions are going to
Yeah.
like rear, whether
Yeah.
it's, pretty or ugly. And yeah, I think that gut feeling, being in the moon, um, yeah, it's just interesting because I think about, well, I guess I was going to go back to relationship, but I'll skip that right now because
You can. That's fine.
um, I feel like, no, wait.
Okay, that's
Okay.
fine. um, okay, well, we can kind of tie up like our main conversation on the sun and the moon,
Right.
unless you wanted to add anything. But pretty much a few other things that I like to mention in terms of like visualizing is the fact that like we can look directly at the moon without getting burned. Like you just
Hmm.
brought up that theme of
Being
how
blinded by
like
the
being
light.
blinded
Yeah.
by the sun and like having to wear sunglasses. And it's so true to the fact of like our experience with the sun and what it represents is like if I go directly to my sun and try to find like the source of my purpose, even though sun is often maybe like signify like I don't sun is often described by purpose.
Hmm.
Purpose. We see
Hmm.
that often.
Hmm.
Um, and it's hard to go straight there, like to this really bright light source, and you're like trying to get to it and
Hmm.
you're failing,
Hmm.
that's been my experience. But when I can access my
Yeah.
moon, I can
Right.
access my moon first, and my moon kind of tells me about my past and what I'm
It's the
feeling.
why. Well, why is that my purpose? And
Yeah.
how did I get here? And,
Yes. And it
and
really
yeah.
like shows this bigger theme of like I need to understand myself first before I can kind of walk forward
Right.
in a direction that's going to be sustainable. I don't
Hmm.
know. That's kind of how I like frame it in my
Hmm.
head. Is like getting to know myself in a way that's um, more digestible,
Hmm.
and because the moon is so like the moon is this part of you that's so personal, like I don't. It's hard to explain, really. The moon, my moon placement feels so personal to me. Like
Hmm.
I really like hold it close to me, and I
Yeah.
want more people to see it, because it
Yeah.
does mean so much. Um, and maybe in astrology really gave me that like definition. Like when I went in and kind of learned, what my moon, what did it mean to have a moon in Aquarius, and that was like that all of the different phrases that we've used tonight is like when I know what I want to say, gut feeling,
Well, and I
like
can
these
only
cards that come.
imagine as a Leo too, and that's the other thing about, not that again any other sign can feel this way with their sun and the moon, whatever, but or any other person I meant to say can feel this way, but I think you know being a Leo and then having, oh well, here's this Aquarius moon, and it's not what people might assume or expect out of you, and it's not like maybe the first thing somebody might grasp when they're
Yeah.
meeting you, and I think yeah, like it's like okay, well now I feel so much more seen because like yeah, there's way more to me than just this first layer that you met, and um yeah, I mean
Yeah.
I obviously can relate with the
Yeah.
Aries moon and the Libra sun because it's like well actually there is a lot more than you might not
That's
realize.
so true because and
Yeah.
I mean for so long you carried that on your back like that Aries moon.
Yeah.
Like I just remember for so long like you wouldn't even post if you were posting about astrology, you would not post Libra stuff. You would only post Aries.
Yeah.
Aries, Aries, Aries. And I'm thinking like but I get that. You know what I mean? I get that like strong relation to this
Yeah.
moon placement. It's like no, this is also
Especially the rising. It's like it
yes,
feels like
it's
it's,
equally a part of who I am,
mhm,
and I think that's so big. And again, a great way to represent it is that, like, let's start with the moon,
mhm,
like I can look directly at the moon. Like, let me just look into the parts of myself that are intuitive and instinctual.
mhm,
That moon is almost like it came to you and you didn't even have to ask for it.
mhm,
And then, you know, allow you to tap into your sun that way and really be able to walk into your purpose
mhm.
in that direction. So they really complement each other well in
Yeah.
that way. Um,
And observing, the people close to you and what their moon signs are, I
yeah.
think, will say something to you maybe somewhere else in your chart. But I know you talked about like how you have, you know, had a lot of Aries moons in your life,
Yeah.
and and that's the energy or whatever for some reason that you're comfortable with or that gravitates towards
Yeah.
you. And I think that's just fun to know in general, because it's like, okay, well, this is something, there's a pattern here. And,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's, if you're interested in like the people that you attract, go to their moon.
Yeah.
And it really is such a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
I could go on and on and on about this. I feel so strongly about it. It wasn't until I started studying astrology and really like went down a rabbit hole one night and was like, let's just look through everybody. Like, I'm on people's Facebook pages. Like, I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of charts saved in my phone. It's ridiculous, but it helped me start to see patterns, like who was drawn into my life during this time, like what, specifically the moon, like what moon placements was I attracting when I was, really struggling and sick and unhealed, and there was a pattern there. There was a very strong pattern. And then who are like the people that I feel this, I mean, really, really strong bond to, and I have a very like, I mean, it is like a physical response to Aquarius moons.
Yeah.
Like I can sense them from a mile away.
And every time.
Yeah. Every time. And I cannot always do that. I'm not the type when people ask me, guess what my sign is? I don't play that game.
Yeah.
I don't play it because
I could be pulling any energy right now.
I could be pulling any, and that goes back to like, where are we? What are the factors at play? Like, what energy is coming out of your chart right now? I'm not always going to be able to guess your sun sign. Sometimes I can guess things based off of like physical manifestations and stuff, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
I just don't play that game. But there's a game that I will play, and that's Are You an Aquarius moon?
Yeah.
And I can spot them from across the room, and it's really some of the only times that I'll ask people, if I can't find their birth information on my own, like what their birthday is and things like that, because I like to play the guessing game with myself. But there's something about, I feel very seen and heard by Aquarius moons. I feel very strongly connected to them. They're some of the closest friends that I have, and I don't meet many. I really don't. It's not the sign that I attract the most of. And then there's Aries moons, and there is, I mean, flocks of Aries moons in my life. It's so many Aries moons in my life. And it's always this, it's different than my relationship with Aquarius moons. It's like an instant comfortability. I think of you, I think of, Cass and other friends of mine who have this placement, and there's just that ease and comfort.
I think maybe it goes both ways too, but I think, I don't know, I'm getting myself what I'm trying to explain, but I think you might be attracted to them, but I think Aries moons are attracted to you. And I think that's kind of where you're like, you as a Leo and maybe your Aquarius moon too. Like, I think Aries moons can be intense for people sometimes, and maybe that's just like a bad stereotype or whatever. I don't think I'm like the most crazy intense, like, don't have a grip on my emotions, but I definitely am not like, super muted and just like flatlined, and I think that it's like that comfortable energy. So anyways, I mean, it's interesting to look into those and see, because that is that, I guess, somewhat more of an inner world, and somebody.
It is. And that's why I say, like, check people's moon signs, check, these will be your people. And it doesn't mean go searching for someone who has the same moon sign as you. Like, your experience with your moon sign may not be the same as me with my moon sign.
Yeah, because it's not for me.
Yeah, and other people with my moon sign maybe don't have that experience with other Aquarius moons. I do. That's just my personal jam.
Right.
I love it, but there's usually a pattern.
Right.
There's usually a pattern. Is there like a specific placement for you? There doesn't have to be. I'm just curious.
Let me think. I would say it's not even a big placement, but I think the closest I get to there being like bigger percentage of people in my life, I think it'd have to be maybe Scorpio moons and Aquarius moons.
Okay.
I think those are the two that I notice like the heaviest
Do you notice
involved.
more of a draw to like a specific pattern of sun signs in your life? I'm just curious.
A draw to?
Well, maybe not a draw to, but people that are maybe whether drawn to or
Like
vice
if I
versa.
have,
Like if you is there a specific placement, either the sun or the moon, in people that you see flock into your life, whether you want them to or not? Cancers.
yeah, I would say cancers. I don't know if it's them or me. I think there's things to be said there. But yeah, I do think is more male Cancer energy. And that's even in
Okay.
my family.
Yeah.
I think I started to open that door up more. But yeah.
Interesting. And there's
And
probably reason to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think the two align pretty well. But and I think for women, I would definitely say I would say Leos and Virgos.
Okay. Yeah, I see that for you. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to think. Like, yeah, that's what I see being something that I gravitate towards.
Yeah.
I feel like, I mean, my mom's a Leo. That's something else weird. I think we should mention that
I definitely want to.
our moms have our we mirror each other's moms' charts in ways. Is that what you're gonna mention?
No, but I would love to mention that. Okay, go ahead.
I don't know exactly all of your mom's placements, but I mean, we're
Let's
both
just do sun and moon.
yeah. Well, wait, of my mom?
Okay. So your mom, so Monique's mom is a Leo sun,
Yeah, Virgo moon.
Virgo moon.
But she has also the same Cancer, Mars and Cancer Venus, like you do.
Oh,
Which is just more in depth than I think.
I don't know. I mean, I did know that at one point, but I had forgotten that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my mom is a Cancer sun. I'm sorry.
That was crazy.
That was so wild. My mom is not. She's a Libra sun, Cancer moon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I had previously mentioned that both of my parents were Cancer moons. So,
but I think that is the only reason I said that was because I think that is me a reason why I might be comfortable with Leos. Is just because my mom's a Leo, and I think you guys are even in a way similar Leos, and not the stereotypical way that people would describe a Leo to be.
Yeah. And even me and her are so different, but so similar.
And the way of what like being a Leo is, of like not necessarily being like the world revolves around me, and I don't necessarily want all the eyes on me, and I don't necessarily want to be the loudest person in the room. Like that's not saying those are bad things. It's just not necessarily the first way to describe you as a Leo. Yeah. So
what I was gonna bring up, and this will probably be one of the last things if you're okay with that, to tie it kind of all in together. It doesn't really tie it all in together, but it is just something fun I want to talk about, is the representation of the sun versus the moon on the mother and the father. And so we had touched on the fact that the moon is ruled by the mother. And there are so many different layers to that. The moon sign is also where you look to, and something that I found really helpful too, and super cool, is to look at your relationship with your mother.
Right, totally.
And I will answer all the questions about that, because that's like my favorite topic of conversation. It's just so interesting. And it's always really a point when I'm talking to someone that like hooks them in a little. People who are, skeptics, who are like, whoa.
Yeah. And they're like, no, especially if it is maybe an Aquarius moon, because it's like, back off, or like a Scorpio moon, like it feels like they do not want you talking about that.
Well, even with Spencer, who's my husband, when I told him his, and he's like, this is weird.
What's his moon again?
This is Gemini. And so it's always fun to get, if you're comfortable going down that road, it's a fun road to go down. But what's not mentioned as often, maybe in like pop astrology and stuff, is that the sun can represent the father.
Right.
And there are some details to that can maybe like deepen the knowledge, and we can go into that at some other time. But it is interesting to look at, especially because I see some people's placements, and this just happens sometimes, but who's like moon is their mom's sign, and their sun is their dad's sign, and that can happen sometimes too. But it's fun to look at, because what we don't always see is that like, oh, my sign is the same as his. That's not always the case. You will often see similar energies in different parts of the chart. So say my sun is in Leo, my dad's a Leo rising, so it's interesting.
Yeah, and I have the same thing.
Yeah, but my moon's in Aquarius, and my mom's not in Aquarius, not sun, not moon, and so and not through the rest of her chart. Now, if we're gonna really dive deep and go down the rabbit hole, it's in the 7th house, and she, 7th house is, parallel themes to Libra, and she's a Libra, so that's a rabbit hole, and maybe doesn't align with like all the ways of thinking that I practice astrology, but it is sometimes kind of interesting to jump down. But where the sun may not always reflect exactly of what the father is in the sense of placement, like the sign that's in the sun, oftentimes like characteristics of your dad, or it can maybe like the full placement, talking about planet, sign, and house together, can maybe represent your relationship with your dad.
And that's another thing too, I think, just really quickly, but yes, the sun is a father and the moon is a mother, and they might be literally that, they might be relationships, they might be like an archetype of that, but I think the relationships too are often the most, I think, relatable for everybody with, especially the moon, it may not be exactly that, but it's representing that sort of energy. And
for sure. And another thing that we will touch on later on, but is important to bring into the conversation, I think, is like aspects to those placements, because oftentimes, and I'll bring into the 12th house, right? If we're talking about the sun and the moon, it's said that sun in the 12th house can represent loss of your father, and moon in the 12th house can represent loss of your mother, whether that actually means death or whether that means some other form of loss can be signified by that. Now, there are experiences where maybe those fall into different realms, or I have my sun in the 12th house and you have your moon in the 12th house, but what are maybe the aspects to other planets, especially planets like maybe Pluto or Saturn,
Chiron,
things like that, where we see these,
that's not planet, sorry,
no, but but same deal, right? Is if we're looking at things like that too, then seeing these themes of whether it be childhood or wounds, or this death and rebirth, what are we, what's being brought to the table. So it's important to look at those too. But I always think that's interesting. And it's just that's always fun for me. It's always a fun like jumping point for me to go down a rabbit hole. Is like, ooh, let's see how much of my life I can pull out of this.
I can't wait to talk about houses for sure.
I know. It's going to be the most fun. But with all that being said, I think that, we've talked about parts of the body, and we've talked about, some of the rulerships, and, some different significations of each of the planets. But I don't want to go any further. Are you comfortable stopping there?
Okay. I think we've, I think we may have gone off a little bit too much, but it's okay, because I'm glad that we did. But I think we, did a good overview of the sun and moon, so
cool. Okay. Well, our next episode, we want to talk about the ascendant, or the rising sign. So that, third component of the big three, which we talked about and seems like many people know about now, is those 3 placements. So we talked about the sun and the moon today, and really tried to just focus on like what does the sun represent and what does the moon represent, and it's easy to draw in examples. And like I said, we'll often bring in examples from our own life and really draw it back into our chart. And if you happen to have one of the same placements as us, lucky you.
Yeah, because we're talking about it.
Because we're talking about it. We will be talking about it. But like the goal is to give people a broad idea to be able to take the information from their chart and apply it. And we will obviously talk about all the signs moving forward too, so that it's easier to maybe connect those dots. But I'm excited to talk about the ascendant next week. And I do think it deserved its own episode. So those will be kind of those three parts. That if those are the 3 things then great. And then maybe looking into more as we go. But,
and the point being that, okay, the sun represents this in pop astrology, we know that. Well, now you can kind of understand why and put that together. And then why does it work this way with this sign, and why does it give those traits? And the same with the moon, and the same with the rising, the kind of what we want to explore even for ourselves. And recording this is just to get to like why and how and put those pieces together. And,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for watching our first episode of Couch Astrology. And we
Bye.
will see you next time.